Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello there. Well, it's time at long last for my rebuttal to the June 2016 JW Broadcasting episode featuring governing body helper David Schafer. Now, I actually started filming this video weeks ago towards the end of July, and the day that I started filming was the day that I broke my arm. So I literally finished filming a part that comes up later in the video and went outside, started playing football and broke my arm. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because when I did that part, I was wearing the same t-shirt. I'm wearing the same t-shirt for the purpose of continuity, but I didn't have a beard, so I was relatively clean shaven. So I'm just preparing you so that later in the video, when I suddenly appear without a beard, you know what the reason is. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
One out
of every 6 people on earth doesn't know how to read. Jehovah's Witnesses around the world have organized literacy classes to help such ones.
This part of the video sounds fantastic. I mean, what could be more agreeable than Jehovah's Witnesses voluntarily taking time out of their busy schedules to teach people how to read and write? What could be wrong with that? Well, there isn't anything wrong with teaching people how to read and write. The only thing is, they're not just doing it out of the goodness of their heart because they want people to be able to get jobs and, you know, have more opportunities. They're doing it so that they can teach people to read and write, so that they can make those people Jehovah's Witnesses. And this is the book, Apply Yourself to Reading and Writing, which appears in the video. And just to show you, on page 23, straight away, we have Jehovah and Jesus. And that apparently is one of the most important lessons or things that people can learn to read or write, is the name Jehovah. So it isn't purely a humanitarian goodwill mission of bringing people into kingdom halls and teaching them how to read and write. It comes with strings attached. Not only can you not boast about doing something like this if you're doing it for ulterior motives, but something like this could also be construed as exploitative. After all, Jehovah's Witnesses are taking people from the community who are illiterate. And people who are illiterate generally haven't read that many books. And people who haven't read that many books are generally easier to indoctrinate because they don't have the knowledge to rebut some of the outrageous claims and propositions that Jehovah's Witness teachings require you to believe.
I
don't like to read. I used to sleep at the meetings.
Well, I think we can all relate to that.
The skills they learn help in their day-to-day life, but also it helps them to learn more about Jehovah and to be able to teach others.
Well, there you have it. It comes with strings attached. They're teaching people about Jehovah, and they're teaching those people to go out and teach other people about Jehovah. It's all about Jehovah's Witness evangelism.
Our theme for this month is consider, incite, and encourage one another all the more so. JW Broadcasting. Why do we enjoy it so much?
Oh, that's an easy one. Because it reveals the governing body and governing body helpers to be manipulative, inept, and insincere, and because the constant flow of propaganda is so clearly designed to pull on the heartstrings and bypass logic entirely. And this helps me appreciate just how wise I was to leave this organization in the first place.
Many of you have expressed how the monthly broadcast draws you closer to our brothers and sisters and to Jehovah's organization. If you're homebound or isolated, you especially treasure these programs.
It's always nice to be told that you treasure something without having an opportunity to actually say what you really think.
And yet, while we appreciate the advances in technology that have made all of this possible, we know that your sincere desire is to be present with your brothers and sisters in person at our congregation meetings. Jehovah's Witnesses around the world share this feeling. In northern Finland, for example, winters are especially cold, even by Finnish standards. At times, temperatures plummet to minus 50 degrees Celsius or minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Under those conditions, it's very difficult to drive, much less walk long distances. Still, the brothers love to gather together. How do they manage it? In one small village, there's a brother who lives near the Kingdom Hall and has a warm garage. On meeting nights, he uses his car to bring each family in the congregation to the hall. Then he parks in his garage and runs the short distance back to the Kingdom Hall. When the meeting is over, he returns all the friends safely to their homes.
Hold on a minute. One guy is a taxi service for the entire congregation. How is that remotely fair on him? This reminds me of so many instances from my time as a JW where it was just expected that people go above and beyond the call of duty. Just because they were able to do something, they had to do something. And there were so many instances where this was completely taken advantage of. But apparently this is exactly what Watchtower expects of Jehovah's Witnesses. If it's within your means to ferry the entire congregation to the meeting and they don't have a means to do it by themselves, that's exactly what you should do.
In the Bible, gatherings for pure worship were occasions for personal association with fellow believers. Such association required travel to a designated place. This involved work, sacrifice, even risk. Consider what is stated at Exodus chapter 34, verse 24. This verse has to do with the command that every Israelite male should gather 3 times a year for the festivals in Jerusalem. Now, what would that mean in practical terms? Wouldn't the nation be left vulnerable to attack if no men were left to guard the land? And if word spread among the surrounding nations that practically everyone congregated in Jerusalem 3 times a year, like clockwork, year after year, wouldn't it be just a matter of time before some invading army would come and pillage an Israelite city? At Exodus 34:24, we find Jehovah's remarkable answer. For I will drive the nations away from before you, and I will enlarge your territory, and nobody will desire, yes, even desire your land while you are going up to see the face of Jehovah your God 3 times a year. Jehovah kept that promise. It's a historical fact that from 1513 BCE all the way down to 66 CE, no foreign nation ever came to invade Israelite territory during those 3 annual festivals.
Okay, let's have some fun with this. So, according to David Schafer, a helper to the governing body, it is a historical fact that from 1513 BCE through to 66 CE, no invading army took advantage of the fact that it was a requirement for all Jews to go to Jerusalem. Really? Well, let's just first of all establish these dates. Now, 1513 BCE, what's supposed to have happened in that year? Well, I have, again, and I've referred to it before, this is pages 294 and 295 in the All Scriptures Inspired of God book. Now, this is useful. These are useful pages because they help us to establish what dates Watchtower attributes to different events. So for 1513 BCE, the event that happened that year is Passover. Israelites leave Egypt. Red Sea deliverance. Egypt's power shaken. End of 400-year period of affliction. Law covenant made at Mount Sinai. End of the 430-year period from validating of Abrahamic covenant. Moses compiles Genesis in wilderness. Bible writing begins. So 1513 BCE is basically supposed to have been the year that the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, which means that David Schafer is counting in this period a 40-year period in which the Israelites were supposed to be wandering in the wilderness. And he's counting that as part of this period in which Jehovah magically made sure that no invading armies conquered Israelite cities. That's the first thing to notice. The second thing to notice is that, as already explained, there simply is no archaeological evidence to support the exodus from Egypt. I'll repeat that. You can research this for yourself. Archaeologists do not agree that there was an exodus from Egypt, a period of 40 years of Israelites wandering through the wilderness. There simply is no evidence for that. Now, that being said, when was it that Israel was known to have been a people living in the land of Canaan? Well, here again, I keep referring to it because it's just brilliant. Here again is the Bible unearthed by Israel Finkelstein. And I'm just going to read to you a few passages. It says, as with the Exodus story, archaeology has uncovered a dramatic discrepancy between the Bible and the situation within Canaan at the suggested date of the conquest. That's Joshua's conquest, between 1230 and 1220 BCE. Now, I should just mention, for the sake of completeness, that according to Watchtower, the conquest of Canaan happened in the 1400s BCE. So there's a difference of opinion there. I would tend to go, however, with archaeologists, and it will all make sense as I read on, because in the footnote for those dates, it says, this date, as we saw in the last chapter, was suggested by presumed references to the Ramesside pharaohs in the Exodus narratives. So they're comparing the Exodus narratives with the pharaohs that are referred to, and by the date of the Menapta stele, dated to 1207 BCE, that indicated Israel was present in Canaan by that time. So the first reference to Israel being in Canaan as a people was dated to 1207, so an Egyptian text. So I'll continue, and it will hopefully become clear. Although we know that a group named Israel was already present somewhere in Canaan by 1207 BCE, the evidence on the general political and military landscape of Canaan suggests that a lightning invasion by this group would have been impractical and unlikely in the extreme. Now I'm just going to flip forward a few pages to the crux of the matter. It says on page 78, archaeology has uncovered dramatic evidence of the extent of Egyptian presence in Canaan itself. So it's saying Egypt was present in Canaan. It's saying an Egyptian stronghold was excavated at the site of Beth Shean to the south of the Sea of Galilee in the 1920s. Its various structures and courtyards contained statues and inscribed hieroglyphic monuments from the days of the pharaohs Seti I, 1294 to 1279 BCE, Ramses II, 1279 to 1213 BCE, and Ramses III, 1184 to 1153 BCE. Those last dates I'll repeat, 1184 to 1153 BCE. Remember, we're counting down as we go forwards in time. So as late as 1153, in this Canaanite city, there were references to Egyptian rule. The ancient Canaanite city of Megiddo disclosed evidence for strong Egyptian influence as late as the days of Ramses VI, who ruled towards the end of the 12th century BCE. This was long after the supposed conquest of Canaan by the Israelites. So I'll let that sink in. But basically, as deep as the 1100s in history, Canaan was under Egyptian rule. They had vassal cities, they had fortified Egyptian strongholds in Canaan right through to the 1100s. And to kind of put that in context for you, if we go back to this, it says that David was born in 1107 BC, so towards the end of the 1100s, that's when David was supposed to have been born. And interestingly, it's only when we start getting to characters like David and Solomon that the archaeological record starts to merge with what's written in the Bible. Now, why am I mentioning all this? Well, I'm mentioning it because David Schafer has said that it's a historical fact that from 1513 BCE, which, as we've established, is when the Israelites were supposed to have crossed the Red Sea, from that point onwards, there was this magical spell in place that Jehovah used to stop invading armies from conquering Israelite towns while Israelites were observing their religious rituals. But here we have archaeology saying, well, actually, first of all, the exodus from Egypt didn't happen. Secondly, the conquest of Canaan didn't happen. And also, right up until the 1100s, Canaan was basically under Egyptian occupation. You cannot make claims about history based purely on what is written in the Bible. What you are doing is you are assuming that the Bible is accurate and more accurate than the evidence uncovered by archaeology. And also, even if we give David Schafer everything in Watchtower's literature about the history of Israel, even if we say, okay, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea in 1513, and there was a wandering in the wilderness, and there was a conquest of Canaan, and there was the judges, and then there was even if you give all of that to David Schafer, you cannot make the claim it is a historical fact that this didn't happen just because it's not mentioned in the Bible. Okay? You can't just assume that because something isn't mentioned, therefore it definitely didn't happen. That is not a scholarly way to approach a subject. There's all sorts of ways in which something could have happened, but it was just never recorded. So this, for me, highlights the utter intellectual bankruptcy of the JW broadcasting format. You have pseudo-scholars who pretend to know about history and archaeology, informing their audience this is a historical fact. But then when you go to the true scholars, you find, oh, actually, this guy's misleading me. This guy is not telling the truth. So it's worth just kind of raising that. And hopefully, I would encourage anyone, by the way, to do their research into archaeology. I haven't finished this book yet, but what I've read so far is fascinating, because I'm not interested in just finding stuff in books that will make me feel good about what I believe. I want to know what really happened. I would be happy if it was proven that there was a wandering in the wilderness, or there was a crossing of the Red Sea. If that's what really happened, I want to know about it, and I would accept that that's what happened. But that's not what the archaeological record is telling us. We can't let guys like David Schafer bully us into believing things just because it suits them. We need to establish what really happened.
Moreover, in a special way, our meetings bring us under the influence of Holy Spirit. At Revelation chapter 2, verse 7, the glorified Jesus said, "Let the one who has an ear hear what the Spirit says to the congregations." We need that Spirit to help us resist temptation, to embolden and equip us for the ministry, and to enable us to make sound decisions.
Hopefully, I'm not the only one who noticed this. David Schafer just read a scripture in Revelation in which Jesus says, Let the one who has an ear hear what the Spirit says to the congregation. So he's telling his readers to listen to what the Holy Spirit is saying to the congregations. That is absolutely not a scripture that says, whenever Jehovah's Witnesses meet at congregation meetings, the Holy Spirit is with them. It's totally reading into the scripture what isn't there.
In his abundant love, Jehovah invites many more to serve him and keep living. Because he lives eternally, Jehovah can nurture those relationships forever.
Jehovah invites people to serve him and keep living. That sounds like a threat to me.
The adversary can offer no such hope of endless life, so he promotes selfishness, pride, and other negative traits that isolate people from one another, even when they're in the same room, engaged in the same activities.
Just offering something doesn't mean you can deliver it. I could offer all of my subscribers $1 million, but that doesn't make me better than another YouTuber who doesn't make that offer because he knows full well he doesn't have $1 million per subscriber to give.
In contrast, our great God is drawing his people closer to himself, to his Son, and to one another, so that we may all be one, as Jesus prayed, as recorded at John 17:21.
Yes, we must all be one with Jehovah, or more specifically, one with what Jehovah commands, or even more specifically, one with everything that Jehovah commands as interpreted by a bunch of guys in New York. This isn't a cult, by the way.
And speaking of the midweek meeting, how are you enjoying the new format? More of the program is devoted to delving into the Bible itself. Time spent on preparing us for our public ministry focuses more than ever on situations we face in field service. And the meetings move along at a satisfying pace.
Again, Jehovah's Witnesses are told how they must feel or how appreciative they must be about something the slave is giving them. In this case, they have to be appreciative that they no longer have a theocratic ministry school. Practically the only thing that Jehovah's Witnesses used to offer that gave people transferable skills to other professions, namely the ability to speak in public. That is now gone. When you go to the meetings, you go to hear what the governing body wants you to hear and learn how to convey this message to other people. That is all the meetings are for now. There is no longer any educational element to them, and you have to be grateful for that.
Yes, JW Broadcasting is a wonderful blessing, a powerful means to talk to and fortify our brothers around the world simultaneously.
If you say so, Schafer.
Still, nothing can replace the experience of worshiping Jehovah in concert with our fellow servants of God at congregation meetings. When a meeting concludes and we lift our heads after the final prayer, we find ourselves surrounded by others who love Jehovah and support his sovereignty.
Ah yes, the feeling of community and belonging, which you can get in almost any other movement, whether religious or secular.
At our meetings, you'll experience what it means to consider, incite, and encourage one another, all the more so as we see the day drawing near.
Ah yes, seeing the day drawing near. Jehovah's Witnesses have been doing that for, over a century. But never mind that, it must be coming any day now.
What many notice when they first attend meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses is that they hear God's name, Jehovah.
As we've already learned in a previous episode, the God of the Bible is not called Jehovah. He was identified by the Tetragrammaton 4 letters, which in English would be YHWH, which most scholars pronounce as Yahweh. Jehovah, on the other hand, is, as you will learn if you research this, a made-up word, a mishmash of German, Hebrew, and English that was concocted sometime in the Middle Ages.
In this life story, So Tan Yuan relates the impact that learning God's name had on her after surviving the killing fields of Cambodia.
Now we have another tear-jerking experience, which this time is to do with the girl who escaped the brutality of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. The thing to remember, though, is that most of this reenactment is covering events before she became a witness. There's only a kind of segment towards the end where we pick up on her being contacted when she moves to America. And yet all of this, all of her suffering is kind of brought under the umbrella of the story as though it's kind of a persecution story. It's not a persecution story at all. She was being persecuted long before she became a Jehovah's Witness. But you need reminding of that when you watch the whole story, which I would encourage you to do. This is purely an exercise in making Jehovah's Witnesses feel as though Satan's world is beyond redemption and out to get them.
One day when I go out to look for food, I walked so far away, I couldn't find my way back. I start crying really hard underneath a tree and look up to the sky and pray to the true God. I was raised as a child to pray to Buddhas, but on this night, when I start praying, I specifically said that I'm not praying to Buddha. I'm praying to the true God. And I say, true God, if you are really here, please help me, because I am really scared and I'm hungry and I'm cold. After I pray, I just fall to sleep under the big tree. Eventually, I make it into the refugee camp in Thailand, and I was reunited with my family. We lived in the refugee camp in Thailand for about 10 years before we come to the United States. My searching for the true God, it didn't stop there.
So, long story short, this lady manages to get to the United States, where she's contacted by witnesses, learns that God's name is Jehovah, and becomes a Jehovah's Witness. Now, there's two things to point out here. If this lady had been contacted by Mormons and had learned that they had the truth, and this video was then used as a Mormon propaganda film, so that there she is huddled by the tree with the rain coming down, and she's saying, I'm praying to the true God now, and the true God, if he's out there, will answer my prayer. And hey presto, when she moves to the United States, she's contacted by the Mormons and she becomes a Mormon. If Jehovah's Witnesses were watching that propaganda film, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't conclude, oh, well, therefore, the true God must be on the side of the Mormons. This is proof. This is absolute proof that the Mormon faith is true. This is not proof at all. This is just somebody who assumes there must be an entity to pray to and happens to get drawn into Jehovah's Witnesses at a later stage. The second thing to point out, which I've touched on in previous rebuttals, is this whole concept of a God who answers prayers. It's extremely morally problematic. Because once you assume that the creator of the universe is intervening specifically in human affairs to your advantage, so that you pray for something, even if it's, in this case, praying for some form of deliverance, if you then say, oh yes, well, the Almighty Creator answered that prayer and delivered this one girl, so that she was okay and so that she understood things and she was enlightened, you then have to explain, why isn't he doing that for people in far worse situations? I'm still traumatized by some of the footage that we saw of ISIS. Well, I didn't really see it. I couldn't really see it. But, they were burning people in cages. And they were throwing homosexuals, or are throwing homosexuals, from rooftops. What about those guys? Don't those guys deserve a break? And yet, oh no, stop the press. This girl cowering by a tree, she was helped. She was worthy of help by God. So again, it's extremely problematic to go down that road of insisting that not only is there a God, but he's also a God who answers prayers to your benefit.
To know that you have a Heavenly Father that cares about you, that was the best feeling on earth. It makes me want to know more about him, want to learn more about him. I would ask questions, did he like this? Did he like that?
This lady's questions were, did he like this? Does he like that? I'm curious to know what sorts of questions she was asking. Does he like jelly? What's his favourite car? Is he a fan of Barbara Streisand? What were these questions?
And then when I go to the Ken Mall,
who did not create it simply for nothing.
I hear Jehovah's name so many times.
I am Jehovah, and there is no one else.
I feel that's it. I found my place.
This girl had extremely low requirements for finding the one and only true religion. So long as she was able to go to a meeting and repeatedly hear a name that was supposed to be God's name, that was okay for her. Never mind evidence, actual evidence to show that this religion had a mandate from the Almighty to dispense wisdom on his behalf.
I got baptized in 2013. My blind aunt that I helped her survive through the jungle, she's still living until today. And now that I can get a chance to talk to her about Jehovah, that was a blessing. And I can't stress enough how wonderful and big privilege that I received from Jehovah just to know who he is and to learn that there is true God. He have a name, and his name is Jehovah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are people out there who are that easily pleased when it comes to finding the one true faith. So long as you repeat God's name, that's good enough for me. But for me personally, there is very little in this girl's story that I can relate to. I'm not interested in hearing this magical name read out again and again and again like some kind of magic saying. What I'm interested in is whether the religion is true or not. And nowhere in any of these experiences or publicity videos will you ever see actual evidence given. It's all directly appealing to the emotion and making witnesses feel good about themselves for basically just hearing stuff that they want to hear, for hearing stuff that makes them feel good.
I always loved music. I got my first guitar when I was 15, and since then, it's been my way of expressing myself. When they asked, "Dave, do you want to join the band?" I didn't have to think twice. Making music, that's all that really mattered to me. I thought being a musician would make me happy. So that is the path I followed. Only, it is not what I thought it to be.
No, playing and performing music to a professional level is the stuff of Satan. Unless, of course, you're playing music for Watchtower and one of its cheesy musical videos, one of which we will be treated to later. The young man featured in this fictitious scenario has a life that is grim and meaningless, until, of course, he is contacted by the witnesses. He gets given a leaflet and eventually is called on, and that's when we learn that he actually was raised as a witness, but faded. He became inactive. So, of course, now his life is dreadful, and only then does he start to realise that he's thrown everything away and he really needs to get back to being a witness.
How come I only get it now? You see, I was baptized, but I never gave the truth a chance.
Young people who walk away from Jehovah's Witnesses and decide to live their own lives without having everything micromanaged for them by Watchtower are failing to give the truth a chance. Never mind the fact that Watchtower presents no real evidence to support its claims to being God's sole channel of wisdom with mankind. Everything is just based on trust. You have to believe them that they are the one and only truth, and therefore walking away from Watchtower is the biggest mistake a person can make.
Roy did come as promised. I told him I'm a baptized brother. He really listened to me.
Probably because he wants you to start being a Jehovah's Witness again.
In the Bible, Jehovah is likened to a shepherd.
A shepherd with a fake beard.
He knows every single one of his sheep, and he knows when one goes missing. A lost sheep is not a lost cause. It still belongs to him, and Jehovah doesn't spare any efforts in searching for it until he finds it. I was like one of those lost sheep, but I still belong to Jehovah. And he has never forgotten about me.
Of course, if you decide you no longer want to be one of Jehovah's sheep, Jehovah will first have his earthly organisation arrange for you to be punished by being estranged from your family, and then at Armageddon, Jehovah will hunt you down and slaughter you. Lovely. Meanwhile, it's time for this young man to get his ass back to the Kingdom Hall, and he knows that before that happens, he needs to shave off his beard, or Jehovah will be displeased.
Man, I was nervous that morning. I wanted to look my best. Roy and Matthew were waiting for me.
Good old Roy and Matthew, ready and willing to love bomb one of Jehovah's returning lost sheep, who incidentally realises that with Jehovah's Witnesses, appearance is everything. Unless you look the way Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to look, again, Jehovah will be displeased.
How I missed this. This is indeed Jehovah's congregation.
Based on what exactly? People shaking your hand?
This is where I belong. The truth has never been so clear to me.
Yes, and the good thing about the truth is it lets you pick the parts of science that you can agree with, such as the existence of DNA, and just get rid of the bits of science that don't agree with Watchtower teachings.
How I enjoy the close company of my brothers and sisters. What I enjoy most is helping others to find our loving Father, Jehovah. With Jehovah's help, I will never be lost again.
Now there's a happy ending. A young man who grabs defeat from the jaws of victory by escaping a controlling cult and then running straight back to it. The moral of the story is, be incredibly stupid and throw away your freedom.
We planned to visit the branch office, and after the tour of the Bethel, two deaf girls started crying. They said the love that this brother sister showed us. Now we feel that Jehovah is the only true God. Since then, they are making many changes in their life, and now one of the girl is an unbaptized publisher. When I see the deaf ones doing changes in their life, they are being happy and also having a good relationship with Jehovah, that makes me more happier.
Again, the bar is set extremely low when it comes to reasons to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. We've already heard the story of one woman who basically becomes a Jehovah's Witness because she likes hearing the name Jehovah, and now we hear about some deaf girls who decide that this must be God's one and only true organisation just because people are kind to them when they visit Bethel. If you're really that easily convinced that an organisation is God's one true faith, then maybe you deserve to be a Jehovah's Witness.
As we've seen, just in this program, examples of faith come in a variety of forms. In the April 2016 program, we saw the first two installments in the series Viewpoints on the Origin of Life.
Indeed we did. One of these installments featured Yaroslav Dovhanich, a Russian zoologist who claimed that many things disprove evolution without actually showing us any of these things. The second scientist willing to sacrifice his reputation on behalf of Watchtower was Professor Raj Kalaria, a heart researcher at Newcastle University. Like Dovhanich, Kalaria seemed to lack a rudimentary grasp of what evolution is, as demonstrated when he described evolution as random and suggested that the complexity of the brain was evidence against natural selection. As I explained in my rebuttal to the April episode, once you understand natural selection, you realise there is nothing random about it. It is a case of cause and effect. I also touched on why complexity does not disprove evolution. In fact, increasing complexity over time is what evolutionary theory teaches us to expect. Now though, two more witnesses with scientific backgrounds are ready to step forward and show the world just how tenuous their grasp on this subject really is.
We'll now enjoy two more examples of those whose backgrounds in scientific study enabled them to cultivate strong faith in the Creator.
My name is Rocío Picado Herrero. I studied chemistry at the University of Salamanca in Spain. I specialize in organic chemistry. This field focuses on the study of the carbon atom and all the compounds that are derived from this atom. I believed that life came about through evolution. I remember seeing a picture in a natural science book that depicted the embryos of different vertebrates. And in the early stages of development, the similarities were outstanding.
Embryology is indeed a fascinating field of study because it shows us how much we humans have in common with other organisms, commonalities that shouldn't be there if humans materialized out of thin air, or dust if you prefer, only 6,000 years ago, which is what Watchtower teaches. How do you explain that humans have a coat of fur and a tail as embryos, which they get rid of during their development in the womb? How do you explain that legless creatures like snakes and dolphins have leg buds for a time as embryos before getting rid of them? These anomalies make no sense at all until you factor in that the genome is like a time capsule with genetic clues pointing to the transitional stages an organism has been through throughout its evolutionary development. Some of these transitional stages can be briefly observed through fetal development. Either this is evidence of evolution, or Jehovah has a strange sense of humour.
But when I started studying at the university, I began studying in detail the process on which the evolution theory is based. To my surprise, I discovered that these processes were not proven facts.
The theory of evolution by natural selection is very much proven by multiple lines of evidence, in the same way as germ theory, gravitational theory, and plate tectonics theory are all proven. Abiogenesis, which Rocío will go on to discuss, is not proven scientific theory. Scientists are still trying to piece together the puzzle and establish whether the first living organisms on Earth arose through chemical evolution. But just because we can't be sure how the first life on Earth arose, this doesn't automatically prove that life had a creator, and it certainly doesn't prove that this creator is called Jehovah and he has personally appointed a group of men in New York to dispense his wisdom to humanity. To assert this as fact with no evidence at all is deeply unscientific, regardless of what your scientific credentials may be.
As a chemist, I'm fascinated by the distribution of atoms within a molecule. In living creatures, the 20 amino acids that are vital for the synthesis of life, the basic proteins required for life, interestingly, are all levorotatory, or left-handed. So when a ray of polarized light arrives, these amino acids divert the light toward the left. There is no explanation for this, because the logical thing would be that if this were a random process, half would be right-handed and the other half would be left-handed. I asked myself, how could evolution produce compounds that are levorotatory and precisely the ones essential for life?
This may seem like quite a revolutionary argument against evolution, but actually it's been around for quite some time. The same argument is found on page 43 of the now out-of-print and thoroughly debunked book, Life, How Did It Get Here? By Evolution or by Creation. Here's what the Creation book has to say.
There is, however, another stubborn problem that confronts evolutionary theory. Remember, there are over 100 amino acids, but only 20 are needed for life's proteins. Moreover, they come in two shapes. Some of the molecules are right-handed, and others are left-handed. Should they be formed at random, as in a theoretical organic soup, it is most likely that half would be right-handed and half left-handed. And there is no known reason why either shape should be preferred in living things. Yet, of the 20 amino acids used in producing life's proteins, all are left-handed. How is it that, at random, only the specifically required kinds would be united in the soup? Physicist J.D. Bernal acknowledges, "It must be admitted that the explanation still remains one of the most difficult parts of the structural aspects of life to explain." He concluded, "We may never be able to explain it."
The first and most obvious thing to point out about this argument is that it has nothing to do with the theory of evolution by natural selection, which explains how the various life forms developed once life was up and running, not how life got here in the first place. Again, conflating abiogenesis with evolution in an attempt to disprove the latter is a trick repeatedly deployed by creationists like Watchtower, and it's a trick I'm frankly getting rather tired of. Then there's Watchtower's straw man argument that scientists believe that amino acids in life forms are exclusively left-handed randomly or by chance. Try as hard as you may, you will not find any scientist who would suggest this. Scientists acknowledge that if something happens, it usually happens for a reason. It turns out, if you bother to research this rather complicated subject, there are any number of explanations for levorotatory amino acids from which to take your pick. It all boils down to the fact that, contrary to what Rousseau tells us, you can't have life with both left and right-sided amino acids. It has to be either one or the other, and whichever gets there first wins. Mandy Levine, an organic chemist from the University of Rhode Island, sheds more light on this matter in this quote from a Forbes magazine article.
Life could have emerged from either left or right-handed amino acids, but not both. There's nothing to prevent life from developing from right-handed amino acids. It just happened that on our planet the left-handed amino acids were what was available.
When you also consider the fact that amino acids found in meteors, which may have played a key role in getting life up and running, are usually left-sided rather than right-sided, the probability of left-sided amino acids winning the chemical tug-of-war improves still further. Put simply, the fact that amino acids in life are left-sided presents no great mystery to scientists. Contrary to what Rossio suggests, it can only be one or the other, and somewhere along the line, for reasons unknown to us, left-sided amino acids won that battle. The only question among scientists is which of the many potential routes to achieving chirality, or one-sidedness, did life choose? Stephen Benner is an astrobiologist and distinguished fellow at the Foundation for Applied Molecular Evolution, and he is quoted as saying,
"The problem with chirality is not so much how could it possibly have happened, but more which of many possible routes actually led to chirality."
There is much more to say on this subject that has been said by people who are far better versed in chemistry than I am. Suffice to say, the information is out there if only people like Rossio would bother to look at it. For those of you who might be interested, I will include some of the links from my own research in the description below.
In the end, I had to conclude that there must be a force, a designer, a creator of life and of the elements and the amino acids required for life.
Of course, the problem with concluding there must be a designer is that you're then locked into an infinite regress of who or what designed the designer. Like most creationists, Jehovah's Witnesses try to get around this problem by essentially ignoring it, saying things like, oh, Jehovah doesn't need a designer because he's always existed. The problem with this is that if you can dismiss the need for the creator to have a creator, you might as well then be consistent and dismiss the need for life itself to have a creator. Basically, you are solving one problem by introducing another in the form of an unfalsifiable argument, since there's no way to prove or disprove your claim that a creator must exist. And it should go without saying that even if life did originate with some kind of intelligent superbeing, you still have all of your work ahead of you to prove that this superbeing's name is Jehovah and that he has a problem with the tightness of some people's pants.
Even though I had a religious upbringing, my ideas were not clear as to who God was. I merely viewed him as a supreme being before whom we would be held accountable.
Rossio admits to having a predisposition instilled in her as a child toward belief in a supreme being before whom all are accountable, without seeing any evidence at all to support this. And this is supposed to be a scientific approach?
The Bible is not a science textbook. Its purpose is not to describe the universe we live in or the laws that regulate our universe. But when it does mention science, and when it discusses scientific matters, it does so with great accuracy.
Total nonsense. Is the Bible scientifically accurate when it describes the earth as having pillars? Is the Bible scientifically accurate when it describes plants being created before the sun or the earth before the stars? Is the Bible scientifically accurate when it describes the moon as being one of two lights or luminaries along with the sun when we know the moon doesn't generate light but reflects it? Is the Bible scientifically accurate when it describes all animals as originally being herbivores? Is the Bible scientifically accurate when it describes the earth as having ends or a length that can be measured? As I've already argued, it simply doesn't cut it to say the Bible isn't a science textbook because it doesn't set out to describe the universe we live in. In numerous places, the Bible brazenly treads on the toes of science and makes bold scientific claims that we now know to be utter rubbish. The Bible is therefore not passive regarding science, it is firmly anti-science. All that aside, I have to wonder why it would be such a bad thing for God to have used the Bible to convey basic scientific wisdom. Imagine the huge leaps in human civilization if he had devoted just a few chapters to the germ theory of disease, or how to make antibiotics, or how to properly filter water, or how to generate electricity. I would have gladly seen practical knowledge like that included in the Bible in place of the never-ending genealogies about tribes and nations, or the exhaustive guidelines on what animals to sacrifice, or the instructions on how to build a tabernacle.
And undoubtedly, the greatest benefit is that it allows me to enjoy a personal relationship with the creator of the universe, a universe that fascinates me from a scientific perspective.
I find the Star Wars universe fascinating from a number of perspectives, but I don't go around telling people that they must yield to the control of the Galactic Empire or else feel the wrath of my master, Lord Vader. What should matter to a scientist is not whether something is fascinating, but whether something is true. Despite being paraded as a scientist, Rocio's approach to the Bible is deeply unscientific, and as with her misrepresentation of evolution, it is clearly coloured by the bias instilled in her by her religious upbringing. Now we switch to a country dear to my heart, namely Belgium, where the next would-be demolisher of evolutionary theory takes the form of a biochemist named David Loos.
My name is David Loos. I studied biochemistry at the University of Leuven in Belgium. And after that time I did a PhD in the same area. When I was a young child I believed in the Bible. But growing up I kind of lost my interest in it.
Again we have someone who grows up with a religious background. I'm noticing a pattern emerging.
When you go to university and you study life sciences or biochemistry, for example, you get introduced into the idea of the origin of life very quickly, and also into the principle of evolution.
Which is exactly what should happen, because it's the job of universities and institutes of learning to teach students the facts.
The professors who taught these courses, they were really scientists with long careers, and they were well-established scientists, and we had a lot of respect for them, so there was just no way to really question the principle of evolution.
Okay, I'm having an irony overload at this point. Davy tells us there was no way for him to question his professors regarding the teaching of evolution because they were so well respected and well established as scientists. Tell me, Davy, precisely how does one go about questioning David Splain, or Gerrit Loesch, or Anthony Morris, or Stephen Lett regarding their entirely baseless theological claims? How can you possibly sit there and bemoan the fact that you weren't allowed to correct the people whose job it was to teach you while making a video for a group of men who will literally punish any Jehovah's Witness who questions their authority? Was shunning used as a punishment for any student at your university who dared to question the professors? I seriously doubt it. The truth is, anyone is allowed to question evolution, and indeed the internet is brimming with people who do just that. Jehovah's Witnesses do not hold the monopoly when it comes to denying science that inconveniently gets in the way of their teachings. But there is a huge difference between questioning evolution and actually disproving it. If what you want is for evolution to stop being taught in colleges and universities, here's what you have to do. You have to gather together evidence that completely negates the mountains of evidence supporting evolution, type it up in a paper, get that paper peer-reviewed, and collect your Nobel Prize. That's how big a deal it would be if someone were to disprove evolution.
In 1999 there was a war in Europe, in Kosovo, and I remember reading in the Bible as a child about the future events that would take place, and I started wondering whether the war in Kosovo was one of those events, so that led me to pick up the Bible again.
Davy is frustrated as a young man because he feels powerless to convince his professors that he knows more than they do about evolution. A short while later, when he is the same age, we find out he is the sort of person who would interpret the 1999 war in Kosovo as possible evidence supporting Bible prophecy. Might it be possible that Davy was giving his powers of reasoning a little too much credit?
At the time, I felt that I had to re-examine my beliefs about the origin of life and also about the principle of evolution.
People like me who accept science and don't pretend to know more than the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community always get a bit twitchy when we hear people refer to evolution as a belief. Evolution is going on all around us whether you believe it or not. It's not a case of believing it, it's a case of accepting it. You believe something that you can't necessarily prove. For example, you might believe your next-door neighbour is having an affair with the gardener because they often disappear into the house together. They could be playing Scrabble for all you know, but an affair is a reasonable hunch. But when it comes to things that are absolutely proven, you stop talking in terms of belief and start talking in terms of acknowledgement. I walked into the neighbour's house and saw her with my own eyes having sex with the gardener, not playing Scrabble with him. Once something is an established fact, you just accept it. The word belief becomes superfluous. It would sound ridiculous to say, I believe my next-door neighbour is having an affair because I actually saw her having sex with her gardener with my own eyes. Just imagine that same scene with Davy flicking through his Bible saying, I felt that I had to re-examine my beliefs about gravity, or I felt it was maybe time to revisit my conviction in germ theory and the principles of plate tectonics. You couldn't speak those sentences with a straight face because even though those are all theories in a scientific sense, they are also proven science. Unfortunately, when it comes to evolution, lots of people, including Davy, still haven't got the memo. And the only reason they single out evolution for criticism rather than, say, gravity or germ theory is because it directly calls into question a literal interpretation of the Bible. What Davy is doing is treating science à la carte, accepting science that agrees with his personal religious bias and rejecting science that doesn't.
Based on the theory of evolution, we would expect to see an abundance of transitional forms to be present in the fossil record. But when we do look at the fossil evidence, we just don't see that. We see that the major species come into existence at specific times, and their form and structure is still exactly the same as their form and structure today. It was actually Darwin himself who wrote in his book that the biggest objection that could be brought against his theory would be the fact that the fossil record does not show an abundance of transitional forms. And that's what really happened. If you look at the set of data, the fossil record seems to prove the opposite of evolution.
Nonsense! Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. Where to begin? Well, first off, Davy has misquoted Charles Darwin. There is actually a web page dedicated to creationist misquotes of Origin of the Species. And surprise, surprise, Davy's misquote about transitional forms is on there under point 2.6. Darwin is quoted as saying,
But, as by this theory innumerable transitional forms must have existed, why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth?
As the webpage points out, posing a question and then later revealing the answer was a common device used by Darwin to explain his theory. He didn't just leave the question of transitional forms hanging there with no attempt to explain it, which is apparently what Davy wants us to believe. If we read on in the book, Darwin goes on to say,
It will be more convenient to discuss this question in the chapter on the imperfection of the geological record, and I will here only state that I believe the answer mainly lies in the record being incomparably less perfect than is generally supposed. The crust of the earth is a vast museum, but the natural collections have been imperfectly made, and only at long intervals of time.
Darwin is here pointing out that the fossil record is imperfect, not just from an evolutionary standpoint, but from the standpoint of anyone who wants a complete inventory of every life form that's ever existed on the planet. Why is that? Well, it's because not everything that dies automatically becomes a fossil. If I were to drop dead now, the chances of me becoming a fossil are almost non-existent. To become a fossil, you have to die in certain precise conditions that allow your bones to be preserved in identifiable form for millions of years into the future. Otherwise, your remains merely rot and disintegrate. Bill Bryson puts it brilliantly on page 390 of his book, A Short History of Nearly Everything, which, by the way, is a magnificent book that I would recommend to everyone.
In order to become a fossil, several things must happen. First, you must die in the right place. Only about 15% of rocks can preserve fossils, so it's no good keeling over on a future site of granite. In practical terms, the deceased must become buried in sediment, where it can leave an impression, like a leaf in wet mud, or decompose without exposure to oxygen, permitting the molecules in its bones and hard parts, and very occasionally softer parts, to be replaced by dissolved minerals, creating a petrified copy of the original. Then, as the sediments in which the fossil lies are carelessly pressed and folded and pushed about by Earth's processes, the fossil must somehow maintain an identifiable shape. Finally, but above all, after tens of millions or perhaps hundreds of millions of years hidden away, it must be found and recognized as something worth keeping.
That's what Darwin meant when he spoke of imperfection in the fossil record. The low probability of something becoming a fossil makes it entirely plausible that entire species can thrive and become extinct without leaving remains by which they can be identified. In fact, an article in the Science magazine from March this year went so far as to say that most species that disappear today will leave no trace in the fossil record. But despite its lack of completeness, the fossil record is still sufficiently comprehensive to prove that transitional forms did exist. I featured one such example recently when I showed a video from the Stated Clearly channel demonstrating how intermediary fossils between whales and land-based mammals show the nostrils drifting up the head towards where the blowhole is found on modern whales. But my all-time favourite example of a transitional form has to be the Tiktaalik. I love the Tiktaalik because it shows that, like all good theories, evolution can be used to predict not just the existence of an organism, but where its fossil remains might be found. In the case of Tiktaalik, scientists theorized there must have been a transitional form between fish and early amphibious tetrapods. They posited that this creature must have had a flat head so that the eyes could be positioned on the top of the head rather than at the sides. This creature must also have had a neck for looking in different directions, and leg-like appendages that could enable it to leave the water. They estimated that this creature would have had to exist in the Devonian period, around 365 million years ago. Therefore, it could only be found in rocks of a certain age, and crucially, rocks that could be identified as forming ancient riverbeds. Neil Shubin and his colleagues, using geological land surveys, found a spot in the Arctic Circle where precisely these sorts of rocks could be located and started digging. And lo and behold, in 2004, Tiktaalik was discovered, a transitional form between fish and early tetrapods that lived 375 million years ago. When researching for this video, I stumbled on a recent video by Neil Shubin explaining his discovery, and if you click on the link, I think you'll find it's well worth a watch. So when Davy tells us there are no transitional forms, either he is being deliberately misleading, Or, as I suspect, like Rocio, he simply hasn't done his research. Why hasn't he done his research? Well, likely because he's emotionally tied to his beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness. And regardless of his scientific background, he doesn't want to expose himself to information that may jeopardize those beliefs.
As a biochemist, I had the opportunity to learn about and study many different biomolecules. And I observed that pretty much every biomolecule is really a complex molecule. We can look at them as nanoscale molecular motors or machines that are performing very complex and specific tasks. For me, the complexity that we see in nature and the complexity in those molecules points to the fact that there really is a creator.
As already explained in my rebuttal to the April video, complexity does not disprove evolution. If an environment demands that an organism should have certain complex attributes in order to survive, given enough time, you can find organisms with those complex attributes. When it comes to chemicals, yes, there are some amazing chemicals that behave in extraordinary ways. Here, for example, we see molecules of the protein myosin dragging a ball of endorphins along an active filament into the inner part of the brain's parietal cortex to produce feelings of happiness. But contrary to what Davy would tell you, scientists do not argue that this amazing chemical reaction is the product of pure chance. If something incredible happens, it can have either a natural cause or a supernatural cause, and before you jump to supporting the supernatural cause, you first have to eliminate a natural cause. By rolling their sleeves up and bothering to put in the lab time, scientists are learning more about how remarkable motor proteins like myosins came into existence. Speaking of labs, I can't help but notice that neither Rocio nor Davy affiliate themselves with a university or centre of learning. This leads me to wonder whether Watchtower is a bit more cautious after the April episode about divulging information that could cause embarrassment that would prevent other JW scientists from coming forward to have a pop at evolution. It can't have been easy for Professor Calaria or Newcastle University to have his anti-science claims exposed on jwsurvey.org, the Friendly Atheist blog, and rawstory.com back in April. It certainly wouldn't surprise me if lessons have been learned and the academic credentials of future scientists put forward by Watchtower grow increasingly tenuous as the bottom of the barrel is soon reached. Incidentally, I reached out to Davy Lose about some of the arguments I was planning to use in this video as far back as July the 21st, and I got a reply the next day, and it said, "Hello Lloyd, thank you for your valuable comments. I am forwarding your email to my private email address, and we can continue the communication from that address. This is my work email. I am a bit busy though at the moment. I will take some time somewhere next week to send you a reply, okay? Thank you and speak to you next week. Best, Davy Lose." That was on July 22nd. We're now on August 13th, so I guess maybe he's just busy or taking a bit more time to reply. Who knows?
Did you see common ground that could help you in your next discussion with someone who believes in evolution? When Sister Picado Herrero's chemistry research showed evidence of design, she called to mind her view of God from her religious upbringing. The person you meet who believes in evolution might also have unanswered questions about God from their upbringing, and they may respond to the simple evidences of a creator that you present.
The problem is, though, that there is no evidence for a creator. If there were, students in colleges and universities would be taught that there is definitely a creator. They're not taught that, not because of some global satanic conspiracy, but because if there is evidence proving a creator, it has yet to be revealed. Once you allow yourself to understand it, evolution through natural selection fully explains the diversity of all living things around us. We share DNA with plants and trees, for goodness sake. Abiogenesis is something different. You can, if you want, insist that the basic building blocks of life were seeded by a supreme being, or perhaps that life came here on comets from elsewhere in the cosmos where such an entity created it. But until you can establish that this early life definitely couldn't have arisen through natural means, the burden of evidence is all on you. Now, for argument's sake, let's suppose it's eventually proven that the first DNA molecules were engineered by some form of celestial intelligence, perhaps on another world before eventually finding their way to our planet. This still wouldn't validate the Bible or establish the theological claims of Christianity, much less the absurd assertions of Watchtower and the governing body. Or, to put it another way, if the universe was engineered by an entity that is obsessed with how we use our genitals, the tightness of our clothing, to what extent men can grow facial hair, or whether women are allowed to operate sound equipment, then the universe is a very messed up place.
Brother Los was moved by world events to pick up the Bible and re-examine his beliefs. Everyone we meet, even firm believers in evolution, are affected by world conditions and may listen to our message of hope.
In other words, don't lose heart if someone isn't willing to join you in denying science. You never know what distressing events might unfold, rendering someone emotionally vulnerable and therefore more susceptible to Watchtower's anti-science propaganda. Now it's time for one of those dreadful music videos, and I'm afraid this one's slightly more cringeworthy than usual.
You can walk, but please don't run. It's hard to do when you're having fun, but there's a reason we don't race. When you're with a friend, it's not the time or place.
Yes, this really is a video about the importance of not running in the Kingdom Hall. But they've also managed to squeeze in some lyrics for brothers who work the microphones.
You got things you have to do, people to serve who depend on you. But don't forget why you're here. Learn to love the friends, let them know you care. Don't run so fast. Take your time and make things last. Learn to love the things you do. Just don't run fast.
It's like they were trying to decide what they should write a song about, and someone put their hand up and said, well, we should really have a song about the importance of not running in the Kingdom Hall, because lots of older friends are getting knocked over. And then the more they talked about it, the more they thought, yeah, but we're going to have to kind of pad it out with something else. We can't just have a song completely about running in the Kingdom Hall. And the best they could do was come up with a bit about how microphone servants need to also take notice of older brothers and sisters and make the time to go up to them, which is really something that applies to everybody, regardless of what age they are, not just to young microphone servants.
By now, some of you have already attended the 2016 Remain Loyal to Jehovah Regional Convention. But millions of us still have an exciting 3 days ahead with 47 well-prepared talks, 18 songs that will sing to Jehovah, and more than 50 audio and video presentations, including 2 feature-length dramas.
Yay! Sounds fantastic! What could possibly go wrong?
All of these program parts have been prepared to help us remain loyal to God despite serious challenges. For instance, how can we maintain our loyalty when under stress or temptation?
Or when there are family members to shun, or when it comes to martyring yourself by refusing blood, or when it comes to depriving a young boy of the chance to become a violinist.
What did Jehovah personally teach Job that can strengthen our loyalty? And why does the Bible say that Jehovah's loyal love is more precious than life itself?
Well, that makes perfect sense. Jehovah's love, as interpreted through the governing body, is more important than life itself. Geez, I can't wait to go to this convention.
To find out more of what you can expect, review the full convention program, which can be downloaded from jw.org. You won't want to miss any part of the Remain Loyal to Jehovah convention program.
Or you can watch my Worst Convention Ever series right here on the John Cedars channel, in which I take my viewers through all 3 days of the Remain Loyal to Jehovah Regional Convention, including some of the most grotesque propaganda videos you are ever likely to see. Part 1 of the series deals with a trilogy of videos that are shown on the Friday that are basically designed to incite Jehovah's Witnesses to shun disfellowshipped loved ones. Part 2 of the series is about a series of videos that are referred to as the bunker videos because they depict a group of witnesses huddled together in a basement awaiting Armageddon during the Great Tribulation. Absolutely fascinating. Part 3 is to do with Sergei's story, in which we follow the life course of a Jehovah's Witness growing up in what we can assume is Russia, and he has all sorts of things to deal with, including being told as a child that he can't become a violinist because he must devote his life to Jehovah, and his life is actually shown ending, or we can assume ending, in a hospital when he refuses blood. Part 4 takes a look at the longer drama videos that are shown on the Saturday and Sunday, namely the modern retelling of the story of Job, featuring a fictional Jehovah's Witness family in which the father loses his child, loses his own father, loses his job, and has to fight cancer. I also take a look at another drama film that's shown on the Sunday, which is basically Watchtower's interpretation of the Bible story of Hezekiah and the siege of Jerusalem by the Assyrians. What I do is I take a look at Watchtower's version of the Bible account and compare it with what we know through history. Part 5 is a more detailed look at the material that's shown on the Friday, apart from the videos that I've already shown. Part 6 is a detailed look at all of the talks that are given on the Saturday. Part 7 I'm actually working on now. I'm hoping that I'll be able to release it before the end of August. It's a detailed look at the material that's shown on the Sunday, apart from, again, any videos that have already been discussed in previous parts. And then parts 8 and 9 are to do with the final video that gets shown on the Sunday, namely the paradise scenes in which all of the characters from the convention videos are all shown frolicking in a cleansed new world. So that's my Worst Convention Ever series. Again, part 7 is coming up before the end of August, and parts 8 and 9 will hopefully at least be shown during September. Anyway, that's all I've got time for this rebuttal. Look out for the July rebuttal before the end of August, and then hopefully in September I'll be able to breeze through the August and September rebuttals, and then I'll be up to date. So as always, I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for watching.